Africa's deserts don't echo with explosions anymore. They echo with silence, the kind that follows withdrawal. For 2 decades, the United States was quietly present across Africa, shaping conflicts, funding governments, and directing a shadow war against terrorism. But in 2025, something began to change. Washington started packing up. From Niger to Chad, and from Libya to the Red Sea, American troops, drones, and intelligence networks are either being relocated or completely dismantled. The Pentagon calls it a strategic repositioning, but in truth, it's a global power recalibration. And the consequences reach far beyond Africa. Chapter 1. The American footprint. To understand what's happening now, we need to look back at how it began. After 9/11s, Africa became a silent battlefield in the global war on terror. The United States expanded operations in places that few Americans could even locate on a map: Mali, Niger, Djibouti, and Somalia. Drone bases were built, training missions were launched. Partnerships were forged with fragile governments. By the early 2010s, AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, had established a network of cooperation across the continent. Its mission was to fight terrorism, stabilize regions, and promote democracy. But the results were mixed. For every success, a new insurgency appeared. For every drone strike, new enemies emerged. Still, Washington's presence was tolerated, even welcomed, as long as it brought security. That era, however, is over. Chapter 2. The fall of France and the end of Western dominance. The real turning point didn't begin in Washington. It began in Paris. France's decade-long campaign in the Sahel, known as Operation Barkhane, collapsed under its own weight. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, a once considered reliable allies, turned their backs on France after a series of military coups. French troops were expelled. Anti-French protests filled the streets. But the departure of France wasn't just symbolic. It shattered the Western alliance in Africa. For years, the U.S. had relied on France to act as its local enforcer, a convenient partner who could carry out ground operations while Washington provided intelligence, logistics, and funding. When France left, America was left exposed. In Niger, the last Western outpost in the Sahel, things unraveled quickly. After the 2023 coup, relations with the junta deteriorated. By 2025, American drones at Air Base 201, one of the largest in Africa, were being relocated. The message was clear: the era of Western dominance in Africa's interior was ending. Chapter 3. The Russian infiltration. Into this vacuum stepped Russia, not with armies, but with mercenaries. The Wagner Group, later rebranded as the Africa Corps, became Moscow's invisible army on the continent. They offered protection to regimes under siege, fought insurgents, and secured lucrative mining contracts. In exchange, Russia gained influence, deep, durable influence. When France withdrew from Mali, Wagner arrived within weeks. When America hesitated in Niger, Russian diplomats appeared with open arms. To struggling governments, Russia's offer was simple: we don't lecture you about democracy. We deliver results, and for Moscow, the benefits were immense. Access to uranium, gold, and rare earth minerals. Strategic footholds across Central Africa. And above all, a political narrative that Russia, not the West, was the true friend of post-colonial Africa. But Wagner's rise also brought brutality. Reports of human rights abuses in Mali and the Central African Republic grew. But unlike Western powers, Russia didn't care about image. What mattered was control. As one analyst told Le Monde, the Russians don't need to conquer Africa. They just need to outlast the West. Chapter 4. The Chinese expansion. While Russia builds influence with guns, China builds it with money. Across the continent, Chinese-funded ports, highways, railways, and digital infrastructure have transformed the economic landscape. From Angola to Kenya, from Egypt to the Congo, Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative has locked African economies into long-term dependency. China doesn't need military bases to gain control. Debt does the job. When a government can't repay its loans, it offers something else: access, concessions, or loyalty. Beijing's strategy is patient. While the U.S. focuses on short-term military missions, China thinks in decades. Even in security, Beijing is no longer absent. Chinese private contractors now guard mining sites, while naval vessels dock in Djibouti, the same city that hosts America's only permanent base in Africa. Two superpowers, just a few miles apart, eyeing each other across the desert. For Africa's leaders, this is the perfect balance. Competition breeds opportunity. And for the first time in modern history, African nations can choose their partners, not be chosen by them. Chapter 5. The U.S. Recalibration. So, what exactly is Washington doing? If it's withdrawing from Niger and scaling back in Chad, where is it going? The answer lies in a shift of doctrine, from presence to projection. Instead of large bases, the Pentagon now relies on smaller, flexible outposts, often within allied countries like Ghana, Kenya, or Djibouti. Instead of counterterrorism, the new focus is counter-influence, containing Russia and China before they dominate the continent. This is part of what some strategists call remote control geopolitics. Use drones, satellites, and local allies, not troops. Influence through intelligence and technology rather than boots on the ground. But this shift has a cost. Without physical presence, Washington loses visibility and local trust. And in Africa, influence is built on relationships, something AI and satellites can't replace. Even the U.S. military acknowledges this problem. A recent AFRICOM briefing admitted that strategic partnerships are harder to sustain when physical presence declines. In other words, you can't influence a continent from 10,000 miles away. Chapter 6. The European angle. Europe, for its part, is paralyzed. After the collapse of France's African policy, the European Union has struggled to craft a coherent response. Germany remains hesitant. Italy is focused on migration. And the UK, post-Brexit, has shifted its gaze toward the Indo-Pacific. A vacuum of leadership, and into that vacuum, non-Western powers have flooded. Even Turkey has begun playing a role, building military bases in Somalia and supplying drones to several African states. The continent is no longer Europe's backyard, it's the world's new geopolitical marketplace. Chapter 7. The local response. Africa's awakening. For decades, Africa was a chessboard where others played the game. But now, many African governments are flipping the board entirely. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have formed a new military alliance, the Alliance of Sahel States, rejecting both French and American influence. Elsewhere, Kenya and South Africa are pursuing independent diplomacy, balancing between East and West. This growing confidence marks a historical shift. Africa is no longer waiting for permission, it's choosing partners on its own terms. Yet this independence comes with risk. When great powers compete on your soil, sovereignty becomes fragile. The Sahel, already torn by climate change and extremist violence, could easily become the world's next prolonged proxy war. Chapter 8. The global picture. Africa in the New World Order. Zoom out, and the picture becomes clear. The US is overstretched, Europe is fragmented, Russia is opportunistic, China is strategic, and Africa, the world's youngest and most resource-rich continent, has become the new arena of global competition. In Washington, policymakers quietly admit that Africa was never their top priority, but ignoring it may prove costly. The Red Sea, the Gulf of Guinea, and the Sahel are now critical to trade, energy, and global security. Control these corridors, and you shape the future of world logistics. This is why, even as troops leave, the U.S. is investing in intelligence sharing, cybersecurity cooperation, and private partnerships. It's not a full retreat, it's a metamorphosis. Chapter 9. The future, a continent at the crossroads. So what comes next? Experts predict that within the next 5 years, Africa will host not one, but 3 competing military ecosystems, US-backed alliances in East Africa, Russian-influenced security zones in the Sahel, Chinese economic protectorates along the coastlines. Each will claim legitimacy. Each will clash through influence, economics, and digital power. But beneath all this competition, the real story is about people, about nations trying to reclaim their agency after centuries of exploitation. And whether America's strategic repositioning is wisdom or weakness will depend on one question: can the US adapt faster than its rivals? Chapter 10. The final silence. When history looks back at this moment, it won't see dramatic withdrawals or televised speeches. When history looks back at this moment, it won't see dramatic withdrawals or televised speeches. It will see quiet transitions, the kind that redefine empires without anyone noticing. It will see quiet transitions, the kind that redefine empires without anyone noticing. A drone base in Niger closing, a convoy leaving Chad. A satellite network expanding over the Atlantic. These are not signs of defeat. They're signals of transformation, of a superpower trying to fight 21st century wars with 20th century structures. And somewhere in the vast deserts of Africa, under the blazing sun, another flag is rising. Not out of conquest, but opportunity. Russia is present, China is patient. And the United States, it's recalculating, in silence.